The smoke hit me before the heat did. I remember that detail clearly. Not the crackle of the fire. Not the orange glow climbing the pine walls. Just that first breath of smoke, the way it sat heavy in the back of my throat like something alive. I was already outside the cabin door when it happened, just returning from the creek with a bucket of water. And I turned around and saw the whole east wall lit up like God himself had struck a match to it. My name is Eli Holt. I was 26 years old, and I was watching over that homestead while my brother Caleb rode into Abilene for supplies. I was not doing a good job of it. I dropped the bucket, didn't even think about it, ran straight toward the door. Margaret was inside. That's the part people always forget when they hear this story. Or maybe it's the part I never say out loud the way I should. Margaret Voss. She'd been staying with us 2 weeks. Rode out from Kansas with nothing but a carpet bag and a letter of introduction from a preacher my brother barely knew. Said she needed work. Said she could cook and keep house. Said she was looking for a clean start, somewhere the past couldn't follow her. Caleb being Caleb. He said yes before she finished the sentence. She was 23. Brown hair. Quiet. In a way that wasn't shyness, more like someone who'd learned the hard way that most words weren't worth spending. Shh. She cooked the best cornbread I ever tasted in my life. And she had this habit of humming old hymns when she thought nobody was listening. I noticed that about her. I noticed a lot of things about her that I had no business noticing. Point is, Margaret was inside that cabin, and the cabin was on fire. I hit the door shoulder first, and it didn't budge. The latch had warped in the heat. That happened sometimes with the dry Texas summer, the wood swelling until the whole frame went sideways. I hit it again. Felt the wood bite into my shoulder through my shirt. And then the smoke came rolling out from under the gap at the bottom in one long dark exhale, like the cabin was breathing its last. Margaret, I heard her then. Not screaming. She wasn't the screaming type. Just my name. Called out in this careful, controlled voice from somewhere near the back of the cabin. The kind of voice that told me she was keeping herself together by sheer force of will. Ely. The window. I can't get the latch open. I ran around the side of the cabin through the dry grass, could feel the heat radiating off the walls like a cook stove with the door thrown open. The shutters were nailed half shut, which I'd done myself 2 weeks back because a summer storm was coming through. And I didn't want the rain getting in. Brilliant piece of work, Eli. Really well thought out. I grabbed the shutter with both hands and pulled. Nothing. The nails held. The fire was roaring now. Really roaring. The way a fire does when it finds something to love. The hay stored in the back corner, I figured. Or maybe the coal oil for the lanterns. I could hear the pop and spit of it. I could smell my own hair. I had no tools. My knife was on my belt, but a knife doesn't do much against a nailed-shut shutter on a burning building. I'd left my hatchet by the woodpile around the front. I'd have to go back around, grab it, come back around. Maybe 40 seconds if I ran, maybe 30. I thought about those 30 seconds. Hold on, I shouted. I'm coming around for the hatchet, I'll be right. That's when I heard the hooves. He came from the tree line to the north. Not the road, not the trail. Just straight out of the cedars at a dead gallop on a black and white paint horse. No saddle. Riding like the horse and him were made of the same material. Like they'd been poured together and hardened that way. Comanche. I knew that much. I'd been in Texas long enough to know the difference between nations, to know the look of a man who'd grown up horseback the way other men grow up, walking, who moved in the saddle like it was his natural posture for being alive. He was maybe 25, maybe 30, with black hair loose and a bone breastplate catching the orange light of the fire. And he took in the situation. The burning cabin, me standing helpless at the window, in about the time it takes to blink. He didn't slow down. He came off the horse at a run. Just dropped to the ground in one smooth movement, while the paint was still moving, and hit the ground already running. and he grabbed a piece of timber lying near the woodpile, long as his arm. And he hit that shuttered window with it. Once, twice. And on the third swing, the whole shutter came off its hinges and clattered into the dirt. I heard Margaret cough. He reached through the window, without hesitating, the fire already licking at the inside wall, and I heard him say something. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. That tone you use when you're telling someone, "Take my hand. I have you. Trust me." And then Margaret's hands came through the window opening and he caught them, and he pulled her through. She came out like something being born. That sounds strange, but it was like that. Sudden, gasping, real. She tumbled out into the grass, and he caught most of her weight against his arm, and the two of them went down together in the dirt and dry grass. And I was already running around the corner of the cabin toward them. She was coughing hard. The kind of cough that comes from the bottom of the lungs and doesn't want to quit. He had his hand flat on her back, between her shoulder blades, and he kept it there. Not patting her, not doing anything dramatic. Just there, like a steady weight to remind her body where it was. I dropped to my knees beside her. Margaret, look at me." She looked up. Eyes were streaming from the smoke. Her face streaked with ash. But she was looking at me, and she was present. And she said, in that careful, controlled voice, "Your cabin is on fire, Eli." I could have kissed her right there, for the sheer nerve of that sentence. "Yeah," I said. I noticed. The cabin burned for 2 hours. There was nothing to be done for it. No river nearby, no real water to speak of. And the three of us just stood and watched it go. My brother's cabin. Every stick of furniture in it. The good cast-iron skillet that had belonged to our mother. 2 months of supplies. All of it. The Comanche man stood a little apart from us. He hadn't said anything since pulling Margaret out. He'd retrieved his horse, who'd stopped about 50 yards off, and was cropping grass with the easy manner of an animal who'd seen plenty. And now the horse was standing near him, and he was stroking the animal's neck in long, slow strokes, and watching the fire the way you watch something that's already decided its own outcome. Sure. I walked over to him. There was a burn on his right forearm. Not terrible, but real. A strip of red skin from wrist to elbow. He got that from reaching through the window. From reaching into the fire without thinking about it first. "I don't have words," I said. He looked at me. Dark eyes, steady. There was something in his face that I couldn't read. Not unfriendliness, not quite warmth. More like a person who'd decided a long time ago to be exactly what they were and had stopped making apologies for it in either direction. He said something in Comanche. Then, after a pause, in slow and careful English, "Is she your woman?" I looked back at Margaret, who was sitting in the grass, with her arms wrapped around her knees and her chin up, watching the fire with those steady brown eyes. "No," I said. Something shifted in his expression. Almost nothing. Just the smallest adjustment, like a door that moves half an inch in a breeze. "She is safe," he said. That is what mattered. His name was Tosabit. I found that out about an hour later, when the fire had settled into embers and Margaret had stopped coughing, and I'd managed to build a small cook fire out in the open so we had something to sit around. He hadn't left. I wasn't sure why. I wasn't going to ask. Margaret was the one who asked his name. Direct as always, looking at him like he was a person she intended to understand, which I suppose he was. He told her. She repeated it back carefully, getting the sounds right, and he watched her do it with that same unreadable expression, and then nodded once. "What were you doing in the cedars?" I asked. "Tree line to the north. Were you hunting?" He considered this for a moment. "Watching," he said. "Watching what?" "The smoke." He paused. It began small, then not small. I came to see. That was all. He saw smoke, so he came toward it, not away from it, toward it. Most men have to work up to that kind of courage, have to talk themselves into it, have to think about whether it's worth the risk. He'd apparently just done it, as if the question of whether to help had never even occurred to him as a question worth asking. Margaret poured coffee into a tin cup and held it out toward him. He looked at the cup, then, at her. "I don't know if you," she started. "Yes," he said. He took the cup, he drank the coffee. He sat with us. And for a long time the three of us watched the embers of the cabin, cool from orange to red to the dull gray of what was left. Shh. Caleb didn't come back until the next afternoon. I'll spare you most of that conversation, except to say that my brother, who is a good man, mostly, arrived to find the ruins of his cabin and two people sitting in the shade of a wagon with a Comanche warrior, who had apparently spent the night keeping watch at the edge of the property for reasons he hadn't fully explained. Caleb's first reaction was what it was. His second reaction, which took about 10 minutes to arrive, was better. He shook Tosabit's hand. Tosabit let him. We spent 3 days rebuilding what we could of the shelter, salvaging boards, putting up a temporary frame, doing the kind of work that puts calluses on top of calluses. Tosabit came and went. He didn't explain his comings and goings, and nobody asked him to. He brought a deer on second day, just materialized at the edge of the clearing, with it across his horse's neck, and left it without ceremony, and was gone again before I could figure out what to say. Margaret watched him leave that time, with an expression on her face that I recognized because I'd been wearing something like it myself. "He keeps coming back," I said. She said. "You could talk to him more, when he's here." She looked at me sideways. "Could talk to him more when he's here." "I've talked to him. You ask him questions about what he's doing and where he came from," Margaret said. "That's not the same thing as talking to someone." I didn't have a good answer for that. The third night, I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of voices. Low, quiet voices. I got up and walked to the open side of the frame. We were sleeping rough, no walls yet on the north side. And I saw them sitting by the cook fire. Margaret and Tosabit. Shh. She was talking, and he was listening with his whole attention, the way some people listen. That makes you feel like the only person alive. And then he said something, and she laughed. Not the careful, polite laugh she used around me and Caleb, but a real laugh, surprised out of her, her head tipping back slightly. I went back to my bedroll. I lay there for a while, staring at the stars through the open frame. After a bit I thought, well, Eli, what did you expect? You had 2 weeks and you spent them being careful. It took another week for me to do anything about it. Tosabit was there the morning. I finally found something resembling a spine. He was helping Caleb notch the new corner logs, which he turned out to be considerably better at than either of us. And I walked up to Margaret while she was hanging the salvaged curtain on the one window we'd managed to frame out, and I said, "I need to tell you something." She looked at me, waited. "I've been careful," I said. "Since you got here, I've been careful about I've kept myself." I stopped, started again. "I noticed you, from the start, the way you are. I noticed it, and I kept it to myself, because I didn't think it was my place. And I'm telling you now because I'd rather you know, and not want it than not know, and I lose the chance." She was very quiet for a moment. "The cornbread," she said. "What?" "The first morning. I was watching, to see if you'd taste it and say nothing, or taste it and say something false, or taste it and mean it." She paused. "You closed your eyes. I had no memory of doing that. I didn't know I did that." "I know you didn't," she said. "That's why I noted it." I stood there in the morning sun with sawdust in my hair and a burned scar on my shoulder from the fire, and I said, "So what does that mean?" Margaret Voss, who was not a woman who spent words she didn't mean, said, "It means I noticed you too." Tosabit left 2 days later. He came to say it, which I appreciated. He stood in the clearing in the early morning and told us he was riding north, back to his people, that the summer was changing, and it was time. He shook my hand the way he'd let Caleb shake his. Not warmly, not coldly, just directly. Then he looked at Margaret. She walked up to him and said something. I was 20 feet away and couldn't hear it. He listened. Something in his face did that shift again. That almost movement, like a thought changing direction, just before it becomes an expression. He said something back. She nodded once. He rode out across the open land, to the north, and his paint horse got smaller and smaller until the cedars swallowed them both. "Did you say to him?" I asked. Margaret came and stood beside me. Her arm was against mine, which she didn't move. I told him that what he did for me, reaching into that fire without thinking about it. I told him I'd spend the rest of my life trying to be someone who deserved it. I looked at her. He said, she continued, that the fire didn't ask if I deserved it. It was just there, and he was just there, and so he did what he did. He said most things are simpler than we make them. I thought about that for a long time. I still think about it. We got married the following spring. Small ceremony. Caleb, a preacher from the next county, 2 women from the nearest settlement who brought a pie and stayed to dance. Margaret wore a dress the color of new grass. I wore my good shirt and spent 20 minutes trying to get my hair to behave, which it didn't. I've been telling this story wrong, I think, for years. I've been telling it as the story of the fire, or the story of the Comanche warrior who came out of nowhere and broke open a shuttered window with a piece of timber. And it is that. That part is all true. But I think the real story is simpler than I've been making it. A woman was in danger. A man saw it and moved without asking himself if he should. Another man watched that and understood for the first time in his life the difference between being careful and being kind. And a woman who'd been running from something for 2 years and hadn't told anyone what, stopped running. True, that's the whole of it. 3 people in the light of a burning cabin, at the edge of something ending and something else beginning, smoke in the air and stars coming out, and the smell of cedar from the tree line, where a man on a paint horse had appeared, and done a thing that cost him, and then ridden quietly away. Tosabit, I never saw him again. I thought about him every day of the first year, and then less. And then, every year on the anniversary of the fire, I sit on the porch of the cabin we rebuilt, Margaret beside me, coffee in hand, usually a quilt across her lap because the Texas nights get cold faster than you expect. And I think about him. About the kind of person who moves towards smoke instead of away from it, about what it costs to be that person, and whether it costs more to be the other kind. Margaret always knows what I'm thinking about on those evenings. She's gotten very good at knowing what I'm thinking, which is alternately the most remarkable and the most terrifying thing about being married to someone. She puts her hand over mine on the porch rail, and we sit until the stars are out. And that's enough. That's been enough for 23 years.